The most powerful goddess in all the 9 realms wept tears of gold, and where they fell, flowers bloomed in the frozen earth. This is not the beginning of her story, though it might seem like it. The tears came later, after the love, after the war, after the terrible price was paid for beauty that could not be contained and desire that could not be denied. But this is where we must start, in that moment, when even a goddess discovers that some losses cannot be measured in silver or jewels, that some sorrows run deeper than the oceans that separate the worlds, and that the heart, no matter how divine, can be broken by the very things that make us feel most alive. Before we continue, if you'd like to join me for more stories like this, feel free to subscribe. I share a new one every day. And if you don't mind, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. To understand Freya and the magnitude of what she would lose, we must first travel back, far back, to the ancient times when the world was still being formed, when the very foundation of creation was still settling into place. We must understand the cosmos that birthed her, the 9 realms that existed in delicate and precarious balance, held together by threads of magic and fate that had been woven together since before time itself had meaning. The Norse understanding of the universe was fundamentally different from the way many other cultures conceptualized creation. There was no single creator deity who brought everything into being through an act of will. Instead, the cosmos had emerged from primordial chaos, from the meeting of fire and ice, from the collision of opposing forces that had somehow, through violence and destruction and transformation, managed to create something ordered and structured from the void. At the heart of this cosmos stood Yggdrasil, the world tree, a structure of such immense size and complexity that even the gods did not fully understand all of its implications. This was not a tree in the ordinary sense. It was a cosmic entity, a being or a structure that served as the foundation for all of existence. Its roots extended into every realm. Its branches reached across the stars. Through its growth and its being, all the 9 realms were connected. All were held in relationship to one another. All participated in a vast web of interdependence and cosmic relationship. The 9 realms themselves were each distinct, each possessing their own character and their own beings, and yet each was also part of the greater whole. There was Asgard, the realm of the Aesir gods, a place of golden halls and rainbow bridges, of order and structure and masculine power. There was Midgard, the realm of mortals, where humans struggled against nature and against each other, seeking to create meaning and civilization in a world that often seemed hostile to both. There was Muspelheim, the realm of fire, where giants of flame dwelt and heat radiated from the very stones. There was Niflheim, the ancient realm of ice and cold, where snow fell perpetually and the very air seemed to freeze breath in the lungs. There was Jotunheim, the land of the frost giants and other enormous beings, a place of stark beauty and terrible danger. There was Vanaheim, the realm of the Vanir gods, a place of fertility and abundance and wild magic. There was Alfheim, the realm of the light elves, beings of grace and ethereal beauty. There was Svartalfheim, the realm of the dark elves and dwarves, places carved deep beneath the earth, where mountains of gold and silver and precious stones existed in abundance. And there was Niflheim, the ancient and primordial realm that existed at the very edge of creation, beyond even the understanding of most beings. Wait, I have already mentioned Niflheim. Forgive me. The 9 realms are complex, and their relationships are intricate, and sometimes in the recounting of such ancient and complex matters, the mind itself becomes confused about what has been said and what remains to be said. Let me correct myself. The 9 realms included Hell, the realm of the dead, where those who had not died in battle went after their mortal lives had ended, a place ruled over by a goddess of the same name, a being neither living nor dead, neither entirely cruel nor entirely kind, but perfectly neutral in her administration of that strange realm between life and death. Into this cosmos, this complex web of interconnected realms and beings and forces, the gods had come into being. There were two families of gods, the Aesir, who dwelt in Asgard and represented order, wisdom, warfare, and the structures that governed civilization and society. And then there were the Vanir, older and more mysterious, connected to fertility and prosperity and magic, embodying the wild forces of nature that could not be entirely domesticated or controlled. These two families had not always coexisted peacefully. In the ancient past, in a time so distant that even the gods themselves sometimes seemed to have only vague memories of it, there had been a great war between them. This was not simply a conflict between two groups of divine beings. This was a cataclysmic struggle that shook the very foundations of creation, that threatened the stability of all the 9 realms. It was said that in the course of this war, walls were torn down, mountains were moved, the very fabric of reality was tested and challenged. But eventually, that war had ended, not in the total victory of one side or the other, but in a negotiation, a treaty, an agreement that there could be peace if both sides were willing to accept certain conditions. One of those conditions was that members of each family would be sent to live in the realm of the other family, serving as hostages, as living guarantees that the peace would not be violated. It was through this practice that Freya came to Asgard. She arrived not as a prisoner in any traditional sense, not in chains or captivity, but as a symbol, a living representation of the commitment of the Vanir to the peace that had been established. She came with her brother Freyr, another Vanir deity of great power and complexity. And from the moment her feet touched the golden halls of Asgard, everything changed. Freya was not like the goddesses that the Aesir were accustomed to. She was not a warrior maiden who fought alongside the gods in battle, nor was she a mother figure who provided comfort and counsel. She was something far more complex and far more challenging to the existing order. She was beautiful, not in the delicate, refined way that some understood beauty, but in a way that seemed almost dangerous. When she walked through the halls of Asgard, beings found themselves drawn to look at her without understanding exactly why they were doing so. There was something about her presence that seemed to shimmer and glow, something that attracted attention and desire in the most fundamental way. But more than beauty, Freya possessed power. She was a skilled practitioner of magic, specifically of a form of magic called cider, which was one of the most complex and demanding forms of magical practice in all the 9 realms. Cider magic allowed a practitioner to see into the future, to perceive hidden truths, to communicate with spirits and entities from other dimensions of reality, to shape the very nature of what was possible through will and intention combined with ritual and practice. More than that, Freya was a warrior. This is something that many modern retellings of her story seem to downplay or overlook entirely, but it is absolutely crucial to understanding who she truly was. She did not simply rule over love and beauty from some distant and passive position. She actively fought in battles. She led the Valkyries, those fierce warrior women who served her into combat. She stood alongside her chosen warriors, and she fought with a skill and courage that matched that of any of the male gods of Asgard. And yet she was also the goddess of love, the goddess of sexuality, the goddess of desire and attraction. She was the being that people called upon when they sought to find love, when they wanted to attract a mate, when they wished to experience the pleasure and connection that comes from sexual union. This combination of qualities of beauty and warfare, of love and combat, of fertility and strength, made Freya unique among the gods. She embodied contradictions that most beings could not reconcile. She was tender and fierce, soft and hard, creative and destructive, all at the same time. She was associated with pleasure in the body, but also with honor and courage. She was the goddess that warriors called upon before battle, but also the goddess of sexual pleasure and intimate connection. And so when Odin, the All-Father of Asgard, first beheld Freya, He recognized immediately that this was not simply another addition to the Aesir family. This was a being who possessed power that existed in some ways outside the frameworks he had carefully constructed. This was a force that could not be easily categorized or controlled or fit neatly into the existing hierarchy of divine authority. And in response, Odin did something that surprised many of the other Aesir gods. He granted Freya an honored place. She was not placed beneath anyone. She was not subordinated to the authority of the other gods. Instead, she was recognized as possessing her own dominion, her own authority, her own realm of power and influence. This decision to acknowledge Freya as an equal rather than as a subordinate had far-reaching consequences that would ripple through all of creation. It set the stage for the extraordinary events that were to follow. Before we move forward into the story of Freya's greatest love and deepest tragedy, we must understand one crucial element of her character. The Brisingamen, the necklace of the Brisings, an object so beautiful and so powerful that it became inseparable from Freya's identity. The story of how Freya came to possess this necklace is itself a tale of power and choice, and the complex negotiations that sometimes occur when a Kong, being of great power and determination, desires something that another being possesses. Freya had heard rumors, in the early days after her arrival in Asgard, of a necklace of extraordinary beauty. It was said to have been crafted by 4 master dwarves artisans of such skill that they seemed almost to possess magical abilities, though whether they were using magic or whether they had simply developed their skills to such a degree that the distinction between craft and magic had become meaningless was unclear. The 4 dwarves were named Alfrig, Valen, Erling, and Grar. Each possessed extraordinary abilities in their particular domain. Alfrig could look at stone and perceive within it all the possible forms that the stone could take. He would then work with infinite patience to gradually remove all the stone that was not essential, slowly revealing the perfect form that had been waiting within. Valen possessed an understanding of metal and its properties that seemed almost miraculous. He could convince metals to flow like water, to move and reshape themselves, and then freeze them into configurations of impossible intricacy and beauty. Erling understood light and refraction, and the way that gems and precious stones could be cut and shaped to catch and redirect light in ways that seemed almost magical. When he worked with stones, the colors would dance and shift as light moved through them, creating optical effects that seemed to alter the viewer's perception of reality itself. And Gray, the youngest of the 4, was the innovator, the one who came up with new techniques and new approaches to the work of creation. When these 4 came together on a single project, the result was extraordinary. The Brisingamen took an immeasurable length of time to create. Some sources speak of weeks, others of months or even years. In the 9 realms, time itself is a slippery thing, subject to the influence of magic and the distortions of perception, and so it is not always clear exactly how long specific creative endeavors take to complete. What is clear is that the 4 dwarves invested an enormous amount of labor and skill and intention into this single object. The necklace was fashioned from gold, not ordinary gold, but gold that had been refined and purified repeatedly until it reached a state of absolute purity. Embedded into the gold were stones and gems of every conceivable description. Rubies so deep red they seemed to hold within them the heat of creation itself. Sapphires so blue that they looked like captured pieces of the sky itself. Emeralds that shimmered with the green of new growth and spring fertility. Diamonds that refracted light into a million different colors and could catch the eye of an observer from across a vast distance. But what made the Brisingamen truly extraordinary was not the materials alone. Rather, it was the way that the 4 dwarves had combined their skills, the way that they had worked together to create something that transcended the sum of its parts. The necklace was not simply beautiful in the way that fine jewelry is beautiful. It was transformative. It was not enough to simply look upon the Brisingamen. To behold it was to be changed by the sight, to have one's consciousness altered, to perceive the world differently after having witnessed such beauty. The light did not simply reflect off the Brisingamen. It seemed to emanate from it, to flow out in waves, to transform the very air around it. And more than that, the necklace was infused with magic, not dark magic, not magic designed to deceive or manipulate, but magic that was inherent to its nature. The magic of the Brisingamen was the magic of attraction itself, of the force that draws all things toward union, of the fundamental principle that underlies all desire and connection, and the joining together of separate beings into momentary unity. When Freya heard of the Brisingamen, when she learned of its existence and its extraordinary properties, she knew immediately that she had to possess it. This was not a matter of desire in the casual sense. This was a deep knowing, a recognition that this necklace was meant to be hers, that it was something crucial to the expression of her own power and identity. And so Freya traveled to the halls of the dwarves, deep beneath the mountains in the realm of the earth, in places where the stone grew warm and glowed with its own inner light, where the very air seemed thick and ancient and heavy with the weight of ages beyond counting. She traveled through passages that few beings had ever traversed, through caverns so vast that they seemed almost to be separate worlds unto themselves. She found the four dwarves in their workshop, and she beheld the Brisingamen for the first time. The accounts of this meeting describe Freya's reaction as one of immediate recognition and intense desire. It was as if she had been seeking this necklace her entire existence without fully realizing it. The necklace seemed to call to her, and she knew with absolute certainty that it had to belong to her, that she could not leave this place without it. Freya asked the four dwarves what price they would demand for the necklace. Here is where the story becomes complex, and here is where different versions of the account begin to diverge. The most commonly cited version of what happened is that the four dwarves, understanding the immense value of what they had created, named a price that was extraordinary and shocking. They would sell the necklace to Freya on one condition. She would spend the night with each of them, one at a time, in their private bedchambers. She would share her body with them, would lie with them, would give them her physical self in exchange for the greatest treasure ever created. This is a story that, on its surface, has often been interpreted as emphasizing Freya's vulnerability, her desperation, her willingness to debase herself for the sake of an object of desire. Some modern retellings of this story have emphasized exactly this interpretation, suggesting that Freya was somehow tricked or manipulated, or that she made a shameful choice out of desperation for the necklace. But this interpretation misses the fundamental truth of who Freya was and how she understood herself and her own nature. To properly understand what actually occurred, we must understand Freya's relationship to her own sexuality and her own body. For Freya, being with lovers was not a source of shame or degradation. It was a natural and beautiful part of existence. She was the goddess of sexuality and pleasure, and she did not view her own body as something precious and valuable that needed to be guarded and hoarded and protected from the sight of others. Rather, she viewed it as a source of pleasure and connection, something to be shared freely with those she chose to share it with, something that could be a gift and a bonding and a form of communication that transcended mere words. More importantly, we must understand that Freya's acceptance of the dwarves' price was not an act of desperation or shame. It was a calculated choice made by a powerful being who understood exactly what she was doing and what the consequences would be. She was not tricked into this arrangement. She was not manipulated. She accepted it with full knowledge, with her eyes open, with complete understanding of what she was offering and what she would receive in return. In fact, many of the deeper interpretations of this story suggest that Freya understood something that the dwarves themselves did not fully grasp. By lying with each of them, by sharing her physical self with them, she was creating connections between herself and the creators of the necklace. She was ensuring that the magic of the Brisingamen would always be tied to her, that it would always respond to her touch, that it would always recognize her as its rightful owner and wearer. In the Norse worldview, sexuality was not something separate from magic or from power. Sex and magic were deeply intertwined. The act of physical union could create genuine magical bonds, could unite souls and spirits, could transfer power from one being to another. By lying with the four dwarves, Freya was not debasing herself. She was making a magical transaction of profound complexity. After the night with each of the dwarves was complete, after she had given each of them what she had promised, Freyin took the brisingamen from them. And as she placed it around her neck for the first time, something extraordinary happened. The necklace seemed to recognize her, to acknowledge her, to awaken to her presence. The light that emanated from it intensified, became more focused, more powerful. It was as if the brisingamen had been waiting for this moment all along, waiting for Freya to claim it, waiting to be worn by the being it was truly meant to belong to. From that moment forward, the brisingamen was inseparable from Freya's identity. When she wore it, her power was magnified tremendously. The magic inherent in the necklace, combined with her own considerable magical abilities, making her even more formidable a being than she had been before. The beauty that the necklace enhanced seemed almost overwhelming to behold. Beings who saw her wearing the brisingamen reported feeling almost physically moved by the sight, as if they were witnessing something so beautiful that it transcended normal comprehension. The necklace became famous throughout all the 9 realms. It was said to be the most beautiful object in all of existence. Kings and emperors coveted it. Giants and dwarves whispered about it in their halls. Even the gods themselves acknowledged that it was without equal. And yet, for all its beauty and all its magic and all its power, the brisingamen would not prove to be the most important thing in Freya's life. That distinction belonged to something far more intangible, far more powerful, and far more capable of bringing both the most exquisite joy and the most profound sorrow. That something belonged to love? It is difficult to know exactly when OPR first arrived in Asgard. The texts provide little specific information about his origins or his arrival. What we know is that he came as a traveler, a wanderer, a being without clear origin or obvious purpose. Some sources suggest that he was a mortal man who had been granted divine status through magical means. Others hint that he was something more complex, a being caught between worlds, neither fully mortal nor fully divine, existing in some liminal space that transcended the normal categories of being. His name was Oper, and the very sound of it seemed to carry with it an air of mystery and wandering. The texts tell us precious little about Oker's origins or his true nature, and this scarcity of information is itself significant. OPR was inherently mysterious, and that mystery seemed to be an essential part of his character. He did not come with a detailed backstory or a clear lineage. He did not arrive with a purpose clearly articulated or a mission obviously defined. He simply appeared, traveling through the 9 realms, seeking something that even he might not have been able to fully articulate or explain. What the texts do tell us is that OPR was extraordinarily beautiful in his own way, not with the overwhelming, almost superhuman beauty of Freya, though he was certainly handsome, but with a quieter, more subtle form of beauty. He had an air of wisdom about him, a sense that he had seen things and understood things that most beings could not comprehend. He had witnessed ages pass. He had traveled vast distances. He had acquired knowledge that was not commonly known. He had a kind of melancholy attached to him as well, a sadness that seemed to permeate his being and color his perspective on existence. And yet he smiled, and he laughed, and he seemed to genuinely enjoy the pleasures of existence, despite the undercurrent of sorrow that seemed to accompany him always. Most importantly, Oper had a kind of charisma, a magnetism that drew people toward him. He did not demand attention or expect to be the center of any gathering. He did not use his presence to dominate or control. And yet, when he entered a room or a hall, beings found themselves naturally turning to look at him, drawn by something they could not quite identify or explain. He had a quality that made others want to be near him, to listen to him, to understand what he was thinking and feeling. No one knows exactly how Freya and OPR met. The sources are frustratingly vague on this point. Some suggest they encountered each other at a great gathering of the gods, a feast or celebration where many divine beings came together from across the 9 realms to mark some important occasion. Others hint at a more chance meeting, a moment when fate brought them together in an unexpected way. Still others suggest that they were drawn together by forces beyond their control, that some power greater than themselves orchestrated their meeting. What is clear and undeniable is that when they saw each other, something changed fundamentally. Freya, who had lived for countless ages, who had experienced many forms of connection and pleasure and companionship, who had loved before in various ways, found herself experiencing something entirely new and unprecedented. She was struck, not metaphorically, but genuinely struck, as if by a physical blow. Her heart, which was the heart of a goddess, and thus far more resilient and complex than a mortal heart, seemed to skip in her chest. It seemed to stop for a moment, as if time itself had paused. And from that moment onward, nothing was the same. For OPR, the experience was similarly transformative. He had been wandering for so long, seeking something that he could not name, driven by an impulse that he could not fully explain. And then suddenly, seeing Freya, he understood what it was that he had been seeking all along. It was not a place. It was not an object or a treasure or a piece of knowledge. It was this being, this goddess, this presence that seemed to contain within herself all the beauty and complexity and mystery that made existence worthwhile. What followed was a love affair of truly epic proportions, not in the sense of being dramatic or involving conflict and betrayal, though those elements would eventually come into play. Rather, it was epic in the sense that it was vast, consuming, all-encompassing. It was a love affair that seemed to contain within itself the full spectrum of what love could be. Freya and Opare loved each other with a passion that seemed almost dangerous in its intensity. The gods of Asgard watched in amazement, and sometimes with concern, as their companion goddess seemed to be transformed by this love. She became even more beautiful than she had been before. She seemed to glow with an inner radiance that had not been present before. When they were together, they would disappear into the corners of Asgard, into hidden gardens and private forests and secluded chambers where they could be alone with each other. The texts described them spending days in each other's company, barely moving, barely speaking, simply existing in each other's presence. They would emerge from these retreats transformed, glowing with a kind of inner light that made even the greatest beauties of Asgard seem pale and dull by comparison. Love for Freya was not a gentle emotion. It was never a soft or quiet thing. It was a force that expressed itself with her characteristic intensity and power. She would have taken on any god, any giant, any being in existence for Opar. She would have moved mountains. She would have redirected the rivers that ran through the 9 realms. She would have reshaped the very fabric of reality if it would have brought him happiness or prevented his suffering. And OPR, for his part, loved Freya with a depth that seemed to encompass the entirety of his being. He wrote poetry about her, composed verses and songs that became legendary for their beauty and their ability to move the hearts of all who heard them. Some say that in his poems he captured something essential about what love meant about, the way that another being could transform your entire understanding of existence, about the way that connection could make life meaningful in ways that nothing else could. He gave her gifts, not material treasures, though he offered those as well, but gifts of his attention, his time, his presence, his genuine focus on her well-being and happiness. He seemed to understand Freya in ways that no one else did. He saw not just her beauty or her power, but the being behind those things, the consciousness that animated her form, the true nature of who she was. The other gods watched this love affair with a mixture of emotions. Some were genuinely happy for Freya, understanding that she had found something precious and rare, something that many beings never found in their entire existence. Others were envious, wishing that they could experience such deep and authentic connection themselves. Still others seemed concerned, as if they sensed that such intense love might have consequences that could ripple through all the 9 realms. Odin himself, despite his vast wisdom and his ability to perceive the future through magical means, seemed troubled by the relationship. Some of the texts hint that he spoke to Freya about it, suggesting that she be cautious. That love between a goddess and a being of uncertain nature might create imbalances that could destabilize the cosmic order. But Freya, for the first time in her existence, chose to prioritize her own happiness over the concerns of even the All-Father himself. She dismissed his warnings, gently but firmly, and continued on in her love for Ar. For a time and time in the 9 realms can stretch far longer or contract far shorter than mortal time, so it is difficult to say exactly how long this period lasted. Freya and Opar lived in a state of almost perfect happiness. This happiness was not naive or ignorant of the suffering that existed in the world. Rather, it was a conscious choice to embrace joy, despite the reality of sorrow, to commit to each other despite knowing that all things must eventually change, to live fully in the present moment, despite the knowledge that the future was uncertain and unknowable. But then, almost imperceptibly at first, something began to shift. Opr became distant, not in an obvious way that would have been immediately apparent to casual observers. But Freya, who knew him more intimately than anyone had ever known him, began to notice subtle changes in his behavior and his demeanor. He would become lost in thought sometimes, staring out at distances that seemed to exist beyond the normal perception of reality. He would grow restless, sometimes in the middle of their most tender moments together, as if some part of him was calling out to something else, somewhere else, some other aspect of existence that he was missing. When she asked him what troubled him, what was causing this restlessness, he could not fully explain it to her. He tried. He genuinely attempted to articulate what he was experiencing. He would begin to describe a sense of being pulled, of feeling divided, of some part of his nature calling him to be elsewhere. But he seemed unable to fully articulate what he was experiencing, unable to put into words something that seemed to transcend language and conceptual understanding. And then, one day, he was gone. He did not disappear suddenly in a moment of magical transformation. He did not vanish in an instant. Rather, it was a gradual process, one that unfolded over time in a way that was almost more painful than a sudden departure would have been, because Freya could see it happening and was forced to watch helplessly as the being she loved most withdrew from her. He would leave their shared chamber in the morning, saying he was going to walk in the gardens or to speak with some of the other gods, and he would return later than expected with a distant look in his eyes and seeming not fully present even when he was physically there with her. He would go to speak with the other gods, and he would linger longer than necessary. He would walk the rainbow bridge that connected Asgard to the other realms, and sometimes he would not return for days. Freya understood what was happening before he fully articulated it. Opr was leaving her. Not all at once, not in a deliberate rejection of her or her love, but gradually, almost reluctantly, as if some force greater than his own will was pulling him away, as if his own nature was calling him to be somewhere else, to be someone else, to live a different kind of life than the one he was living in Asgard with her. And when she finally asked him directly, when she finally asked if he was planning to leave and not return, he could not lie to her. Their love was based on truth, and he could not betray that now, no matter how much he might have wanted to spare her the pain of what he had to say. He told her that he must go. He could not explain fully why, but he explained as much as he could. He told her that there was something in his nature that was incompatible with staying in one place, with remaining with one being, with putting down roots and creating a permanent home. He told her that he loved her more than he had ever loved anything or anyone, and that this very love was beginning to create an imbalance in him, a sense of being divided against his own nature. He told her that he did not want to leave, but that he must. That the alternative, to stay but to feel himself slowly dying inside, to remain present in body but absent in spirit, to watch himself gradually become a mere shadow of who he truly was something he could not endure. He told her that to truly love her, he had to leave her, that his love for her expressed itself precisely in his willingness to accept the pain of separation rather than inflict upon her the slow torture of living with someone whose heart was elsewhere, whose nature was calling him to something other than what they had built together. And then he told her something that would shape the course of the rest of the story. He promised that he would return. He could not promise when, and he could not promise it would be in the way she expected or hoped for. But he would return, because what they had shared could never be completely undone. He would wander, yes, but that wandering would always be tied to her, and he would return again and again, in ways both mysterious and profound. Some part of him would always belong to her, and that part would draw him back to her, no matter how far he traveled. Freya begged him to stay. She offered him everything she had, her power, her magic, her dominion over entire realms, all of it. She told him that they could find a way to make it work, that love was strong enough to overcome any obstacles, that the two of them together could figure out a way for him to stay without dying inside. But Opar, for the first time, refused. And his refusal, delivered with infinite gentleness but absolute firmness, was perhaps the truest expression of his love for her. Because what he was refusing was not Freya herself. Rather, he was refusing her offer to sacrifice her own nature and her own understanding of what was necessary for the sake of keeping him with her. He was refusing to allow his love for her to become the cause of her suffering. He told her that he could not stay, that some part of him would always be torn, always be searching, always be seeking something that could not be found in this settled peace of Asgard, that he was cursed, in a sense, to eternal seeking, and that the only way to truly honor her love was to accept this curse rather than inflict it upon her. And then he left. The day that Opar departed from Asgard, Freya wept. But her tears were not ordinary tears. Being the tears of a goddess, they were not simple salt water. They were tears of pure gold. They fell from her face like precious rain, striking the ground of Asgard and transforming into substance of tremendous value and beauty. Where they fell on stone, they became veins of gold running through the rock, creating pathways of precious metal that would glimmer in the light. Where they fell on earth, they sank into the soil and enriched it with their presence, making the ground more fertile, more capable of producing abundance. Some of her tears fell into the streams and rivers that ran through Asgard, and those streams carried the golden tears down toward Midgard, the realm of mortals. And mortals, in the ages that followed, would find these tears of Freya in the form of gold nuggets and treasures hidden in riverbeds and mountain streams. They would discover them and become wealthy beyond their expectations, never knowing that they were weeping in their hands, never understanding the story of loss and love behind their newfound fortune. The gold would become treasured by human societies, would be fought over and collected and transformed into objects of beauty and power. But it would always carry within it some trace of Freya's sorrow, some echo of the love that had been lost. But Freya did not simply weep and fall into despair, though despair was certainly available to her, and she felt it deeply. Instead, she did what she had always done when faced with adversity and challenge. She acted. She took the pain she was experiencing, and she transformed it into purpose and determination. She called to her Valkyries. The Valkyries were among the most extraordinary beings in the 9 realms. They were fierce warrior women who served Freya, but saying that they were her servants or her subordinates misses the fundamental truth of their relationship. The Valkyries were far more than simple foot soldiers or attendants. They were warriors in their own right, possessing power and skill that matched or exceeded that of many of the gods themselves. The Valkyries possessed abilities that transcended normal understanding. They could take many forms. They could appear as beautiful women when they chose to do so, but they could also transform into eagles, flying through the sky with wings that caught the light and gleamed like metal, soaring across vast distances with speed and grace that seemed almost impossible. They could move between the 9 realms with ease, traveling through hidden paths and secret doorways that were invisible to most beings. They could perceive things that were hidden from normal sight. They could see into the future and perceive events yet to come. They could see traces of the past and understand the causes and origins of things that others could not see. They could read the threads of fate itself, the connections between beings and events that wove together to create the tapestry of existence. Their primary duty was to attend to those who fell in battle. They had the ability to choose which warriors were worthy of honor, which souls deserved to be brought to Freya's hall, Folkvanger, where they would feast and fight and revel for eternity in Agonk, paradise beyond the reach of ordinary death and suffering. But they also served Freya in other capacities, as her representatives in the world, as her agents when she needed things done that required both skill and devotion, as her eyes and ears when she needed to know what was happening in the far corners of the 9 realms. The Valkyries themselves were beings of extraordinary complexity. Each one had her own personality, her own preferences, her own relationships and histories. They were not mindless servants who followed orders without question. Rather, they were intelligent, powerful beings who had chosen to serve Freya out of something deeper than obligation. They served her out of a kind of love, a recognition of her power and her worthy leadership, a bond that transcended the normal hierarchies of the divine world. When Freya called upon them now, summoning them to her in her hall, her grief was evident to all of them. They could see it in her face, hear it in the tone of her voice, feel it in the very air around her. Her grief was a palpable thing, a presence that affected all who came near her. And yet, along with the grief, they sensed also her determination, her will to act, her refusal to simply accept what had happened and move on. Freya gathered the Valkyries around her, and she told them what had occurred. She explained that Opar had left, that he had departed from Asgard, that he had gone to wander in the 9 realms, driven by some force or some aspect of his nature that she did not fully understand. And she told them that she was sending them on a quest to find Opar, to track him, to follow every trace of him through all the 9 realms, to use all of their considerable abilities to locate him and understand where he had gone. But more than that, she told them to observe and report on what they found. What could cause a being to abandon even the most perfect love? What force was strong enough to pull Opar away from her? What had he been seeking that he could not find in Asgard? What was driving him onward, calling him forward, compelling him to leave her behind? And then she added something that would prove to be crucial to everything that was to follow. She told them to be careful, that she sensed something in the 9 realms, some presence, some force, something that seemed to be moving through the worlds following a similar path to Okar's. There was something else out there, she said, something that was also searching for Opar, and she wanted her Valkyries to be aware of it, to understand what it was, and to report back to her about it. The Valkyries accepted their charge. They understood the importance of what they were being asked to do. They understood that their beloved goddess was hurting, and that they needed to help her find answers. They prepared themselves for their quest, and then they departed, flying out from Asgard on their eagle wings, soaring across the vast distances that separated the 9 realms. What they discovered in the course of their search would take them to every corner of creation. They traveled to Muspelheim, the realm of fire, where the giants of fire dwelt and heat radiated from the very stones beneath their feet. Here they found traces of Opar, hints and indications that he had come seeking knowledge and wisdom from these powerful fire beings. They spoke with the giants of Muspelheim, asking them about OPR, and the giants confirmed that he had indeed been there, that he had asked him questions about the nature of creation and the forces that powered the universe. They traveled to Niflheim, the ancient realm of ice and cold, where snow fell perpetually, and the cold was so intense that it seemed to reach into the very soul of any being foolish enough to venture there. Here, too, they found traces of Oker's passage, indications that he had spent time in contemplation and study, that he had sought counsel from the ancient spirits that dwelt in that frozen realm. They journeyed to Jotunheim, the realm of the frost giants, places of stark beauty and terrible danger, where magic ran thick through the air, and beings of enormous power dwelt in fortresses carved from ice and stone. Again, they found evidence that Opare had been there, that he had sought wisdom and understanding from beings whose age and power transcended that of most other creatures in the 9 realms. They traveled through Midgard, the realm of humans where mortals built their cities and farms and temples, where they struggled against nature and against each other, where they sought to create meaning and civilization in a world that often seemed hostile to both. And here, in Midgard, they began to understand something crucial about Oker's nature and his purpose. In Midgard, the Valkyries discovered that OPR had been attempting to teach humans things knowledge, about magic, about poetry, and the power of words, about the arts and crafts that could elevate human existence and help them move beyond mere survival towards something more meaningful and beautiful. He seemed to be working towards some kind of purpose, some kind of goal that involved improving the condition of mortals, giving them access to wisdom and abilities and understanding that could transform their lives and their societies. This discovery suggested something profound about OPR's nature. He was not simply a wanderer seeking his own pleasure or growth. He seemed to be driven by a sense of purpose, by a desire to bring about positive change in the worlds. His leaving Freya might not have been a rejection of their love, but rather a manifestation of his nature. A being driven to do what he felt was necessary even at great personal cost, even at the cost of separating himself from the being he loved most. But as the Valkyries continued their investigations, as they traveled from realm to realm and gathered more and more information about Opia's movements and his purposes, they began to notice something deeply troubling. They were not alone in their quest. Someone else, or something else, was also following Oker's trail. The traces they found suggested another presence, a being that was following the same path, seeking the same knowledge, asking similar questions about where OPR had gone and what he was doing. And this other presence was leaving traces of dark magic in its wake, magic powered by negative emotions, by forces that were twisted and corrupted, by intention that was malevolent and consumed by obsession. The Valkyries began to investigate this mysterious follower more closely, to track the traces of dark magic, to understand who or what was pursuing the same path that Opare was taking. What they discovered horrified them and filled them with dread. The being that was following Opare was another goddess, a being named Gullveig, a goddess of gold and material wealth, a being who had once been worshipped by those who sought riches and prosperity, by those who desired accumulation and possession, and the security that came from having abundant resources. But something had changed in Gullveig. Something had twisted within her. The Valkyries pieced together a story from fragments and traces, from whispered conversations with spirits and the testimony of beings they encountered in their travels through the 9 realms. Gullveig had become obsessed with OPR. She had somehow become convinced that he should belong to her, that he was rightfully hers, that some cosmic injustice had been perpetrated in allowing Freya to have him. What had begun as a casual interest had gradually twisted into an all-consuming obsession. Gullveig thought about Opare constantly. She imagined what it would be like to be with him, to have him love her, to experience the connection that Freya had been privileged enough to experience. The more she thought about it, the more consumed she became by the desire to have him. And as her obsession grew, she had begun to use magic to enhance her pursuit of OPR. Dark magic that was powered by her resentment and jealousy magic, that drew its strength from her conviction that she deserved what Freya had, that some injustice had been committed in the distribution of love and happiness in the universe. The Valkyries knew that this information would be crucial to Freya. They knew that they needed to return to Asgard immediately and report on what they had discovered. But before they could do so, before they could gather all their findings and prepare to return home, they had one more encounter, one more discovery that would set everything in motion and change the course of the story forever. They found Gullveig herself. The meeting was tense and dangerous from the very beginning. Gullveig, upon seeing the Valkyries, understood immediately that they served Freya and that they must have been sent on a quest related to Opiar. She did not attempt to hide what she was doing. Instead, she confronted them directly, her voice dripping with resentment and conviction. She told them that Freya did not truly deserve Opiar, that Freya was using him, that she was keeping him prisoner in a golden cage of love and pleasure, when what he truly needed was someone who could understand the depths of his being, someone who could appreciate his true nature. She told them that with her, Opiar could find true happiness, true understanding, true connection. The Valkyries tried to reason with her, tried to explain that such obsession was dangerous and unhealthy, that love based on possession and obsession could never be genuine, that she was deluding herself about what she felt and what she thought she could offer to OPR. They tried to appeal to her better nature, to suggest that she might find happiness elsewhere, that not everything that could be desired deserved to be pursued. But Gullveig would not listen. She was too consumed by her obsession, too convinced of her own righteousness, too certain that she was fighting against an injustice. She told them that she would find OPR, that she would convince him to be with her, that she would use whatever means necessary to undo whatever bonds held him to Freya. And then she told them something that the Valkyries recognized immediately as a serious and potentially catastrophic threat. She told them that she had made contact with forces far older and more powerful than any of them, forces that predated the gods themselves, ancient primordial powers that dwelt in the spaces, between spaces, and in the places beyond normal reality. She told them that these forces had agreed to help her, that they had lent her their power in exchange for certain promises about what would happen in the 9 realms if she succeeded in her goals. The Valkyries realized in that moment that they were facing something more dangerous than they had initially anticipated. The confrontation between them and Gullveig did not turn into direct combat, though it came dangerously close. There were moments when the air seemed to crackle with potential violence, when magic flared and weapons were nearly drawn. But before any actual battle could commence, the Valkyries used their superior knowledge of the hidden paths between worlds to escape, to slip away through portals and passages that were invisible to normal sight, to make their way back to Asgard so they could report to Freya on everything that they had discovered. Freya listened to their report with growing concern and a kind of terrible understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. She understood immediately that Gullveig represented a genuine and significant threat, not just to her relationship with Opiar, but to the stability and balance of the 9 realms itself. A being who was willing to deal with ancient primordial forces, who was willing to make bargains with powers beyond the comprehension of most gods, who was willing to accept consequences that could affect all of creation. Such a being was capable of causing damage far beyond what most would have imagined. Freya knew that she needed to take action. She could not simply ignore this threat and hope that it would resolve itself. She needed to confront it, to address it, to ensure that Gullveig's obsession did not lead to catastrophe. And so she did something that had significant consequences. She convened a council of the gods. She called together Odin and Thor and Frigg and many of the other powerful beings of Asgard. She told them everything that the Valkyries had discovered. She presented the case for why Gullveig needed to be stopped, why this obsession needed to be addressed before it escalated further into something far more dangerous. The gods listened carefully to her report. Some of them were sympathetic to her plight, understanding that she had genuine reasons to be concerned. Others seemed more concerned about the abstract principle of what should be done, rather than about the specific situation with OPR and Gullveig. And some of them, including some who had coveted Freya's attention over the ages and resented her for never reciprocating their desire, seemed almost pleased to see her suffering, seemed to view this as an opportunity to diminish her standing or influence. After hearing all of the arguments and perspectives from the assembled gods, Odin, in his capacity as the All-Father and ultimate authority in Asgard, made a suggestion. He proposed that rather than the gods taking direct action against Gullveig, which might escalate the situation and bring further consequences, which might provoke the ancient primordial forces she had made contact with, the situation should be resolved through a more formal and structured process. He suggested that Freya and Gullveig should present their cases before a divine tribunal, that the gods would hear both sides of the argument and make a judgment about which goddess had the rightful claim to OPR's heart and loyalty. He proposed that this process would be more just, more fair, more in keeping with the principles of divine law and order. It was a proposal that seemed fair and reasonable on its surface, that appeared to respect the principles of justice and proper procedure, that suggested that the truth would prevail if simply presented before wise judges. But there was something in the way that Odin made this proposal that suggested he knew more than he was saying. Some of the texts hint that he had consulted his own magical abilities, had glimpsed the future through his mystical vision, and had seen something in what was to come. What exactly he saw, he did not fully share with the assembled gods. But his proposal, stated with all the weight of his authority as the All-Father, could not be refused or questioned without appearing to be afraid of the truth. Freya understood the implications, but she also understood that she could not refuse. To refuse would be to admit that she was afraid, that she doubted the righteousness of her position, that she lacked confidence in the power of truth and justice. And so she accepted the proposal, though she had significant doubts about its wisdom. Gullveig, when she was informed of the proposal, also accepted it. In fact, she seemed almost pleased by the opportunity to present her case before the gods. She believed that she could convince them, that her passion and her sense of justice would overcome any objections, that somehow the truth of her position would be apparent to all who heard it. The tribunal was prepared. A special hall was constructed, a neutral space where magic could be freely used, but where no single being would have an advantage due to the nature of the location itself. The judges were assembled, Odin himself representing wisdom and fate and the overarching order of the universe, Thor the thunder god representing strength and justice and the protection of the innocent, and Frigg, Odin's wife and mother of gods, representing compassion and understanding and the balance between mercy and fairness. What Freya did not know, what none of them knew except Odin himself, was that Gullveig had made a bargain of her own, a bargain that went even deeper and more dangerous than the Valkyries had suspected. There are beings in the 9 realms, ancient and primordial entities that existed long before the gods came into power. These are the old magic, the ancient things, the primal forces that dwell in the spaces between spaces and speak in languages that predate language itself. They are beings of tremendous power, but also of limitation. They are bound by rules and laws that are older and more fundamental than even the laws that govern the gods. They cannot directly interfere in the affairs of the 9 realms, but they can lend their power to those who ask and who are willing to pay the price. Gullveig had made contact with one of these beings, though exactly how, and through what means, remains unclear to this day. Some texts hint that she had traveled to the edges of creation, to places where the barriers between worlds grew thin, and had called out to the ancient powers, begging for their help. Others suggest that the ancient being had come to her, recognizing in her the kind of obsession and desperation that could be useful for its own mysterious purposes. Whatever the case, they had made a bargain. Gullveig had promised that if the ancient being would lend her power if it would amplify, her magic if it would ensure that her case would be heard and considered fairly before the divine tribunal, then she would use her newfound power and position, once she had claimed Opir and elevated herself to a higher status among the gods, to weaken the barriers between worlds. She would work to allow these ancient primordial forces greater access to the realm of Asgard and to the 9 realms more broadly. It was a dangerous bargain. It was a bargain that could have consequences that rippled through all of creation, that could destabilize the careful balance that had been maintained for ages. But Gullveig made it anyway, driven by her obsession, convinced that the power of her love and the strength of her desire would overcome any obstacles, convinced that she would succeed in her aims and that the price she was paying would be worth it. The tribunal commenced. For 3 days and 3 nights, Gullveig and Freya spoke before the judges, each presenting her case, each trying to convince the assembled gods that her position was the correct one, that justice lay on her side. Gullveig spoke first. She told the story of her longing, of how she had first encountered Opr, of how she had been immediately struck by his beauty and his wisdom. She spoke of her search for him, of how she had dedicated herself to finding him, to understanding him. She spoke with genuine passion and conviction. She did not lie, not exactly, but she shaped her words carefully, emphasizing the nobility of her quest, while downplaying her obsession and the dark magic she had been using in her pursuit of him. More than that, she used the power that had been lent to her by the ancient primordial being. The very words she spoke seemed to shimmer and sparkle with an irresistible quality. The judges found themselves moved by what they heard, found themselves beginning to believe that perhaps Gullveig did deserve a chance, that perhaps there was some justice in her claim, that perhaps Opr could learn to love her just as he loved Freya. She spoke of her love as something noble, something worthy, something that deserved to be honored and recognized. She spoke as if she were the victim in this situation, as if she were being denied something that was rightfully hers by a cosmic injustice. She spoke in a way that made her obsession sound like dedication, that made her pursuit sound like a noble quest for true love. The gods listened, and they found themselves moved by her words. Even Freya had to admit, as she listened to Gullveig speak, that there was a kind of power in what she was saying, a magnetism that came from the ancient forces that were amplifying her words. But then Freya spoke. When a goddess tells her true story, not a shaped story designed to manipulate or persuade, but the genuine truth of what she has felt and experienced and understood, it carries a power that no amount of borrowed magic can match. Freya spoke of her love for Opr, but she did not present it as a simple possession of him, as a claim of ownership. Instead, she spoke of what love truly meant. She spoke of the willingness to let go, of the courage required to accept that the beloved might need to be free, of the deep wisdom that understands that true love sometimes means accepting absence and pain. She spoke of how she had discovered that real love was not about keeping the other person, about binding them to you, about making sure they never left. Real love, she said, was about honoring who the other person was, about recognizing their nature and their needs, about being willing to support them in becoming who they needed to become, even if that meant accepting separation and loss. She spoke of Okr's sacrifice, of his decision to leave her in order to preserve something essential about himself, in order to prevent himself from slowly dying inside while bound to her. She spoke of how she understood now that this was the truest expression of his love for her, not to stay, not to remain forever by her side, but to do what was necessary for his own well-being and for the greater good, even at great personal cost. She spoke of how Gullveig's love, by contrast, was not about Opr at all. It was about Gullveig's own desires, her own obsessions, her own need to possess something beautiful and unique. She spoke of how such love could never be truly reciprocated, because it was not based on knowing the other person or honoring who they were, but on an image of them of fantasy, a projection of what Gullveig wanted them to be. And as she spoke, as her words carried the weight of genuine truth and authentic emotion, the gathered gods began to understand something that Gullveig's magic had obscured. They began to see that Freya's love was not possession. It was liberation. It was not about keeping Opir, but about honoring who he was and what he needed, even when that came at tremendous personal cost to herself. The judges did not take long to deliberate. Their decision was unanimous. Freya's claim to Okr's heart was affirmed, not because she had defeated Gullveig in a magical contest, not because she had used her power to overwhelm her rival, but because the truth of her love, its depth, its wisdom, its willingness to release that which it cherished was manifest and undeniable. But this victory, this judgment in Freya's favor, did not bring the happiness or relief that one might have expected. Instead, it brought something far more terrible. Gullveig's reaction was immediate and catastrophic. She had been so certain of victory that the loss shattered something fundamental within her. The ancient being that had lent her its power, perceiving the failure of the bargain, began to withdraw its support. But Gullveig did not accept this gracefully. She did not acknowledge defeat and move on. Instead, she did something that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. She invoked a curse. In the old languages, using magic that few were even aware still existed, using knowledge and power that she had been given by the ancient primordial being she had made her bargain with. Gullveig cursed Opir to eternal wandering. She cursed Freya to eternal waiting. And she cursed all of the Valkyries, every single one of them, the entire sisterhood that served the goddess to disappearance. The curse took effect immediately, its power evident and irrevocable. Opir vanished from the sight of all but Freya herself. He did not disappear entirely, did not cease to exist, but he became hidden from the world, invisible to most beings, accessible only to his true love. He was forced into an even deeper wandering, an even more profound solitude, cursed to eternal separation that only Freya could momentarily bridge. He was trapped in a state of perpetual searching, forever seeking and never finding, forever longing and forever separated from the one he loved. Freya found herself frozen in an eternal wait, unable to fully pursue Opir, unable to let him go, caught in a liminal state between presence and absence, love and loss, unity and separation. She could still sense him, could still reach out and touch him in certain moments, in certain places, but those moments became rarer and rarer, and the separation became deeper and more profound. And the Valkyries simply ceased to exist in any normal sense. They did not die, they were not destroyed, but they became something neither fully present nor fully absent. They were trapped between worlds, caught in the curse that Gullveig had laid upon them. They existed in a kind of twilight state, neither fully in Asgard nor fully in any other realm, trapped in the spaces between spaces. Some say that on certain nights, when the conditions are exactly right and the barriers between worlds grow thin, you can still see them, the Valkyries, flying through the sky, their wings catching the light of the northern stars, their forms translucent and shimmering. Some say that they are trying to return to Asgard, trying to break the curse and reunite with Freya. Others claim that they are trying to find Opar, trying to complete the quest that their goddess sent them on so long ago. But whether they are trying to do one thing or the other, or whether they are simply lost in their in-between state, unable to find their way back to the world they knew, no one can say with certainty. The Valkyries have become figures of myth and legend, appearing in stories and sagas, sometimes helpful to heroes, sometimes mysterious and dangerous, always caught between worlds, always searching for something that remains just beyond their reach. And Gullveig herself, after laying the curse, after putting into motion events that would have consequences echoing through eternity, she attempted to retreat, to flee back to whatever hiding place she had come from. But the ancient being that had lent her, its power was not finished with her. It had made a bargain with her, and she had failed to uphold it. The consequences were immediate and terrible. Gullveig was consumed by the magic she had invoked, caught in the backlash of the curse she had laid. She did not die again. Death would have been simpler, would have provided closure and an end. Instead, she was transformed. She became a being of pure curse stuff, a living embodiment of obsession and resentment, a creature trapped in a cycle of attempting to claim that which could never be claimed, of seeking that which could never be found. According to the Norse sources, Gullveig was burned 3 times by the gods and 3 times reborn, each time growing stronger and stranger. She became associated with gold and greed and the corrupting influence of material desire. She became a figure of warning, a symbol of what happens when love twists into obsession, when the desire to possess overwhelms the capacity to accept and understand. But the story does not end here, for stories in the Norse tradition rarely end cleanly or completely. Instead, we are left with threads that continue, with mysteries that remain unsolved, with the knowledge that the consequences of these events continue to ripple through the 9 realms and through all the subsequent ages of the world. Freyja continued to rule in her hall Folkvanger, continuing to receive half the honorable dead, continuing to embody the power of love and war and desire. But something had changed in her. The stories that came after this time suggest that she became slightly more distant, slightly more tragic, a goddess who understood loss and longing in a way that she had not understood them before. She still went to battle. She still led her warriors. She still embodied the fierce power and dangerous beauty that had always defined her. But there was something in her eyes now, some depth of understanding that came from having experienced genuine loss, some knowledge of what it meant to have the most precious thing in the world torn away from you. And sometimes in the quiet moments, when she was alone in her hall or walking through the gardens of Asgard, she would weep again. And her tears, still gold, would fall to the earth and become treasure. The wealth of nations would be built on the sorrow of a goddess, and no one would ever know the price that had been paid to create it. OPR continued to wander, but now his wandering was cursed, was forced, was a kind of eternal torment. He could never fully belong anywhere. He could never fully integrate into any world or form or existence. And yet he could never fully escape either. He was caught in his own liminal space, accessible only to Freyja, visible only in certain moments, present in the world more as an echo or memory than as a true being. Some say that on certain days, when the light falls in a particular way, you can see him walking through. Midgard still attempting to teach humans, still trying to bring knowledge and beauty and understanding to those who need it. Some say that he appears in poetry and in songs, that he speaks through the words of those who have been touched by genuine love and genuine loss. Some say that he is still seeking something, even after all these ages, that he is still wandering toward a destination that he can never quite reach. The Valkyries continued their in-between existence, trapped in the curse that Gullveig had laid upon them. They became figures of myth and legend, appearing in stories and sagas, sometimes helpful to heroes, sometimes mysterious and dangerous, always caught between worlds, always searching for something that remained just beyond their reach. And gold the tears of Freyja that fell to earth and became precious metal, the very substance of wealth and value that Gullveig had been obsessed with, became more complex and contested in its meaning. It was no longer simply a symbol of value and worth. It became a symbol of loss as well, a reminder of tears shed, of love that transcended simple possession, of the price that must sometimes be paid for desiring too much or the wrong things. The deeper lesson of this story, the thing that the ancient North understood that many have forgotten, is that even the most powerful beings in existence are not exempt from the fundamental conditions of existence itself. Even goddesses experience love and loss. Even the divine must learn to let go. Even the most magnificent beings must sometimes accept that there are things they cannot control, cannot possess, cannot fully understand. Freya's tears of gold remind us that beauty and sorrow are often intertwined. That love is not always simple or uncomplicated. That sometimes the greatest proof of love is not the ability to hold on, but the courage to release. That the most powerful magic in all the 9 realms is not the magic of possession or control, but the magic of acceptance and understanding. The Valkyries, caught between worlds, remind us that sometimes those who serve with absolute dedication and loyalty must also learn to serve in ways that we cannot always see or fully comprehend. They remind us that there are forms of existence that do not fit neatly into the categories of life and death, presence and absence, that the world is far more complex and mysterious than our simple understanding of it. And Gulveig, twisted and cursed, consumed by her own obsession, serves as a warning about the dangers of allowing desire to override wisdom, of letting longing transform into possession, of the terrible price that must be paid when love becomes about owning rather than honoring. These are the stories that the people of the North told by their fires in the long dark winters, stories that helped them understand their own experiences of love and loss, stories that gave meaning to both joy and sorrow. They are stories that were carried across the seas and through the centuries, preserved in sagas and poems, kept alive through the dedication of those who understood that, in preserving these tales, they were preserving something essential about what it means to be alive, what it means to love, what it means to be willing to accept loss in exchange for the profound beauty of having loved at all. This is the story of Freya's tears of gold, of love, and war and vanished Valkyries, of the goddess who understood that the greatest power is sometimes the power to let go, and that the tears we shed for what we have lost are more precious than any material treasure could ever be.